Imperium Games and their game which didn't ever feel like it was going to release in full, and it's still not really. They're just stating that they're going to refocus their efforts on getting Star Citizen to commercial release. All right, I'm gonna rant for a second. Get ready for it. You guys ready? Let's go rant mode. Rant mode. Star Citizen is a game that I will never forget. It's one of those games that, as upon its announcement around 2011 or 2012, had so many people hyped up. People love space games, and this is coming from Chris Roberts as well, right? So Chris Roberts, who's renowned for previous titles, and this helped this game garner a lot of attention. And so it was a crowdfunded game, and I remember even initially just looking at some of the crowdfunding packs, and basically the way they were doing it was like, oh, well, we're going to have parts of the game that are playable to begin with, and you can, experience some things while we finish up the game. You can fly around in your ships that you buy to support the, us finishing development of the game and things like that. And these will be the ships that you fly around in and stuff when the game fully releases to play in as well. And they were, most of them, insanely expensive, And I'm going to bring up the wiki page on Star Citizen in a moment to give you a full grasp, if they don't cover it here, on what the entire process of this game has been. But I'll break it down for you in a very concise, for what I can remember. This game was announced in 2011 to 2012. Again, crowdfunded project. And at this point, has amassed well over, I think, $600 to $700 million of crowdfunded money. At this point, was originally announced for a full release, a 1.0 release in 2014. That's a decade ago, 10 years ago. And they're still releasing alpha content. I know that they call these alpha pieces of content modules. I understand that some of these modules are pretty fleshed out and pretty playable. They still do not culminate into connecting to one another into a fully playable, full release version of a game that was promised 10 years ago. And I think that it's unfortunate that people that bought into this premise and were promised something 10 years ago are still waiting for this promise to come to fruition. That's not fair. That's not fair. They got baited into paying in and supporting something, and the company did not fulfill their end of the bargain here. So I think that what has happened, from what I can tell on this front, is that Cloud Imperium, with this project of Star Citizen, had too much scope creep on the project. They didn't focus down enough on through the entire process of trying to make sure that they were getting the full release of the game out to people, right? And that should have been their main focus, especially once they realized that they weren't going to be hitting that 2014 window of release for people. They should have really started buckling down and going, we need to get this full release out. We promised people this. It might not have all the content that we want it to have, but we need to start focusing on trying to get something full out, and then we can attach more content to the game as we move forward. That's not what they've done the past 10 years. The past 10 years, it feels like they just keep coming up with new ideas and going, well, the full game can wait. And then they start pushing towards a different area of trying to put new content for a alpha module. And then it keeps happening over rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. So here we are 10 years later, and there's still not a full game for people to play. Now, with this article, Cloud Imperium Games refocuses its efforts to get Star Citizen to commercial release. I mean, I'll believe it when I see it, dude. But let's read this. Star Citizen has been in alpha testing for over a decade now. Thank you, yes. With the finish line still seemingly far out of sight. Cloud Imperium Games, however, reports that it is now making headway on the multiplayer Space Sims development. Oh, you're making headway now? Now, 10 years after the game was supposed to full release. Now you're making headway on the multiplayer Space Sims development, and that it's closer than ever to the game's long-awaited version 1.0. With just few more major hurdles to overcome. The studio is currently tackling one of its most ambitious goals yet, bringing all the game's servers together into one persistent universe through server meshing, which it started testing earlier this month. The studio is also refocusing its efforts to finally get the game out of alpha testing and onto the next phase of development. Quote, while we recognize that there is no definitive finish line in an online MMO and that we will always be adding new features and content for many, many years to come, Star Citizen 1.0 is what we consider the features and content set to represent commercial release, says Chris Roberts, founder and CEO of Cloud Imperium Games. This means the game is welcoming to new players, stable and polished with enough gameplay and content to engage players continuously in other worlds. It is no longer alpha or early access. Which, let's be fair, I think with the scope of and magnitude of what they always wanted this game to be, people would have been okay and accepting in large part if this game delayed a year, maybe even 2. But 10? This begins with identifying what features and content are required to create a fully released space MMO while laying the foundations for future updates. Adds newly appointed Senior Director Rich Tyrer. To be 100% clear, though, this doesn't mean going back to drawing board or totally changing the vision of what SC currently is. With this aim, Chris and I have overseen the creation of a roadmap that takes us all the way up to 1.0 and outlines all the features and content we need, and just as crucially, the ones that will come post full release. And it only took you 10 years to get this done. Fantastic. Great. Star Citizen single-player spin-off Squadron 42 is also on its way to full release. The studio says that it's now feature complete and will soon be entering its polished phase. Like the MMO, it still has no release timeline though. In the meantime, learn more about Star Citizen's latest alpha update. Latest alpha update. After 10 years after it was supposed to release. Alpha update. Get wrecked, dude. I'm over this. I don't know how anybody is still buying into the premise of how ridiculous this is. I'm sorry. For a crowd-funded game especially, and, you know, what this was always, you know, all the promises of you know, and look, I get it. The gravity of what this was always supposed to be was huge, but they promised people things. They promised people dates, right? And they needed to make sure that there was some kind of basic game for people to dive into and play in the first place, and then add to it. They lost track. They had too much scope creep for the project in this game, where they went, oh, that would be cool, that would be cool, that would be cool, that would be cool. And they just kept pursuing it instead of buckling down in the first place, making sure they had something solid for people to dive into in the first place, close to when they told people originally that the game would be finished, and then add content to it afterwards. They failed a lot of people here, and it's ridiculous to even read this. It feels so dumb.